Welcome to the Honest Health Podcast with your host, Jeffrey Burke. Honest Health brings you the brightest minds in the natural products industry, as well as athletes and entertainers. Jeff will keep you entertained and informed while educating on how to be successful on your healthy journeys. Now, here's your host, Jeffrey Burke.
Hello and welcome back to the Honest Health Podcast. My name is Jeffrey Burke. I'm so glad you're here. Hey, if you're tuning in for the first time, welcome to the platform. If you're back with me or if you've been one of those long timers that have been with me for decades and decades, welcome back. It's always great to have you here. This new podcast is basically for focusing on the information that we need to be able to make our lives better, healthier, and maybe make some better, wiser, healthier decisions about our health and well-being. We also know that we need to be honest and realistic with ourselves and realize whatever state of health we're in now, we didn't get here overnight. This has been long coming in many instances. So I'm bringing you the best minds in the industry to make sure that you've got exactly what you need and the tools available to you to get the job done. I would like to welcome my guest this morning. I think you're going to find that this is going to be, so much fun and so much information. Joanie Blaxter is with us today, and we're going to be talking about the gut. We're going to be talking about probiotics. We're going to be talking about all kinds of fun things today. So let me welcome my guest. Hey, Joanie, how are you?
Oh, good morning. So nice to see you. Thank you for the invitation.
Oh, my pleasure. We've been trying to get this to connect for a while, but I've learned that all good things happen in the order they're supposed to happen. So I'm just happy to have you here today.
Likewise, really glad to be here.
So a little bio, we need to get a little bit of a background here. In the natural and organic industry for over 3 decades, Joanie Blaxter has always walked the talk of diet and health. A volunteer Weston Price Chapter Leader for Ventura County, California from 2009 to 2020. She also received her certificate in Permaculture Design in 2010. As National Educator for Just Thrive since 2018, Joanie has now privileged to receive training in the most leading edge cult microbiome science from Kiran Krishnan. Now, this is the research microbiologist and formulator behind these amazing products that Just Thrive. Now, having conducted well over 30 clinical studies in human nutrition and probiotics, what Krishnan teaches to medical audiences internationally is so groundbreaking, it is still being integrated into university curriculums. Joanie is honored to bring you Just Thrive, the pioneering gut microbiome wellness line that grows directly out of this next generation science. I have to tell you, I started using the Just Thrive a couple years ago, and it has done remarkable things with my digestive system and just made things so much better because I live on the road. And if you're on the road a lot, guess what? You're not eating well, you're eating differently, you're changing the structure of your body. But I have to tell you, I have French bulldogs. And I've used them with my French bulldogs as well. And one of them has some major stomach problems, and it completely corrected the problem. So I am excited about this line. And I think if people don't know about Just Thrive, we're going to teach them about it today.
Oh, I'm so glad you brought up about your lovely, positively wonderful dogs because I have cats. And similarly, I had one cat who was a chronic vomiter until I started giving her the spore-based probiotic. And then subsequently, we came out with a pet probiotic.
Mm-hmm.
And I totally, I'm going to get you a sample of the pet probiotic because, our pets, animals have different digestive tracts than we do. So, my kitty didn't stop vomiting until I got her on the spore probiotic.
Oh, I think it's wonderful. And I think, most of us, I think pet people, animal people, we treat our animals like parts of our family. So we want them to be healthy. And, we only have them in our world for a short period of time. So it's up to us to give them the best quality we possibly can. As I think back about probiotics, when I first started in the industry back in 1980-ish, really early 80s, probiotics were at that point called acidophilus. We were trained to only recommend them for 7 days after an antibiotic and then put it in the refrigerator and never touch it again until you needed it. We have come a long way.
We have, and I'll tell you a very interesting factoid, which is that SIBO has become, people are really getting a lot of diagnoses for SIBO. And for your listeners, SIBO stands for small intestinal bowel overgrowth. So what happens when you have SIBO is that your large gut is where the majority of your bacteria reside, something like 100 trillion. And if you get too many, they can move up into the small intestines, and that causes problems because they're really supposed to be down in the large bowel only. And testing is showing that a very high percentage of people with SIBO diagnoses are coming up with overgrowth of lactobacillus because we've been so insistent for so many decades that was the only bacteria that we needed, when in fact we have hundreds and hundreds of strains down there, hundreds, and each strain performs a different job. The way I like to think of it is that if you think of that 100 trillion permanent bacterial residents that live down there, you think of that like a city. Each strain is like a municipal worker that does a different job in your city. And we know, because the technology is advanced to the point now, that we can measure the contents of the guts of people who are living a more indigenous natural lifestyle, more natural diet, et cetera, et cetera. So presumably those people have gut populations similar to what our ancestors had, who were foragers, right? Didn't get exposure to antimicrobials. We know that those people have approximately twice the total population in their guts compared to those of us living in the industrialized world. So we have about 100 trillion. We're supposed to have about 200 trillion. And we're supposed to have a huge variety of strains of bacteria living in that environment. Each strain is doing its own job. What if all the municipal workers you had living in your city whose job was to, say, fix your stop signs? What if through exposure to antimicrobials and not taking care of your gut, you didn't have any more people down there to fix your stop signs? Your whole city would fall apart. That is what is happening to us in the Western industrialized world. That's why we're hearing so much about the gut microbiome now.
Well, and thank you for that. To your point, as you study cultures around the world, you study cultures where people are so much wiser with their health choices and their lifestyles, and they embrace nature and they embrace healthy foods. But for the most part, and I see it all over the country because I travel so much, you see that most people today eat the foods that they crave, not the foods that they need.
Yeah.
And in so many instances, we are driven to eat foods that we are almost addicted to, and I was actually I just got back from California, and I was talking with a young lady at one of the stores I was at, and she said, my problem is, she goes, I've corrected my diet. I now eat a Mediterranean diet. It's very, very healthy, lots of water. I don't do anything processed, nothing. And I said, how long was the process to make it comfortable? She said, it took me like 3 or 4 months to really get in the groove. And she goes, and now I'm happy with it. But everyone around me, they ridicule me because I don't want to do what I used to do, but I was so unhealthy, Jeff, and it's just, I don't want to go backwards. And she says, I know it's a hard process, but we can't ridicule everyone. People have to do it on their own time, if and only ready when it's their time, I guess.
Yep. Yeah. The bad guys, when we get an overgrowth of pathogens living in our gut, which, by the way, according to gut experts, based on clinical outcomes, is anywhere from 97 to 99% of all of us. Okay. Oh. And the bad guys love sugar, right?
Yes.
And if you don't feed the bad guys, they will tell your brain, eat more sugar, eat this junk food. That's why it takes so long to make that transition, because they have to die out. But the whole time they're dying out, you're getting constant cravings. It's very tough. It's much easier if you introduce a really good probiotic, you introduce a really good prebiotic. That whole transition period can be so much swifter. And I'll tell you something else that really made me fall out of my chair when I learned it. they know now for sure that to a degree, how much weight we gain and our appetite is controlled by the kinds of bacteria we have in our gut. And they began to get really clear clinical evidence of this by doing, people that get, for example, C. diff, they get very ill. That is life-threatening. And for people who struggle to try to get rid of with antibiotics, et cetera, and it doesn't work, as a last resort, they will do a transfer of from another person. They choose the host. Those bacteria from that person's gut gets transferred into their gut. It's very dicey. It has a high level of failure. Oftentimes you have to get multiple ones before it actually implants and takes. But there was an example of a woman who did that. Her sister was the host. Her sister was much heavier than she was. When she got her sister's bacteria in her gut, she gained something like 40 pounds in 3 months. And similarly, they know from experiments with mice that you can breed mice to be fat. And you can have two kinds of mice. They're on exactly the same feed. They're on exactly the same chow. When they take the contents of the skinny mice and they put it in the fat mouse will lose weight. When they take the contents of the gut of the fat mice, put it in the skinny mice, they gain weight.
It's like you're giving a brain and craving transplant to the other host.
Well,
Oh my goodness.
it's because the bad guys, the bad buggies, their natural byproducts are inflammatory.
Yes.
So, we know that when you get a high bodily inflammatory load, it has all kinds of metabolic complications. And of course, gaining weight is one of those.
The average person today probably is still learning about probiotics. We consider it very, everyday conversation for many of us, but some people, maybe for the very first time, are still hearing about probiotics because it's still growing. And I feel there's some confusion out there because there's so many different strains and people get confused. I mean, is there a proper way to read the label and look at a product to really know what you're getting? Because I think sometimes label confusion is part of it as well.
Oh, that's the best question, really, because, most of us make our choices just looking at the label on the shelf. So, yeah, the kinds of probiotics that have typically been on the shelf that most of us are used to buying or selling if you work in a health food store are the lactobacillus and bifidobacterium based ones. And that's still the majority of product on shelf. Just Thrive actually pioneered what's called the spore-based probiotic category with our foundational product, which is called spore-based probiotic and antioxidant. And it's called an and antioxidant because it's got a strain in it. We don't add antioxidants. It has a strain in it that produces antioxidants in your gut. So spore bacillus are relatively new to our industry in this country, but they're not new in terms of what scientists have been studying. And in fact, abroad, Europe, Asia, and Latin America, physicians have been prescribing spore bacillus strains since the 20s. They just didn't migrate over to this country particularly. And as I said, Kiran Krishnan was one of the very first people to bring it to our industry over here. So when you're looking at a label, and first of all, you want to know, is this lactobifido or is this spore bacillus? It's important to understand that spore bacillus are bacteria that have naturally evolved over eons to have the ability to be hardier by making a protective protein-based shell. That's all the word spore means, is it's an organism that has that ability to make a shell. So when its environment becomes unfavorable, it'll make the shell, it goes inside it. When it's inside the shell, it's still alive. It's just simply in an inactive state. So if we lived in the world the way Mother Nature designed it for us, and hopefully what someday we will go back to, but probably probably not in our lifetime, Jeff. But the way Mother Nature designed it is these kinds of spore bacteria are supposed to be in the soil everywhere. They're not doing anything when you're thinking about the kinds of strains that are in a probiotic off shelf that you purchase. But they like to hang out in the soil in that alive but inactive state because they're hoping to catch a ride on a plant. And ideally, that plant is growing organically without any pesticides and herbicides on it. Because you have to remember, all pesticides and herbicides across the board are antimicrobial. They're not just neurotoxins, they kill bacteria. And again, most of that 100 trillion organisms in the gut, something like 90 to 95% are specifically bacteria. So you want to stay away from antibacterials whenever possible. So the way Mother Nature set up the system is, we're hunter-gatherer foragers. We come along, we grab the food, we eat the plants. The plants are naturally loaded with these wonderful gut-friendly spore bacillus strains. And because they're inside the shell, when we eat the plant food, they very successfully pass through stomach acidity, which you have to remember, in terms of acidity level, it is comparable to battery acid. If you were to accidentally dip your own fingertips into your own stomach acid, it would permanently remove your fingerprints, in case you're planning on being a spy, by the way. That's how you do it.
That's
So,
funny.
the shell is so protective that they get through that successfully, as long as they're inside the shell. So the 4 strains that are in Just Thrive, we have the gastric survival test results showing that they 100% survive and 100% colonize in your gut. So, you eat the plant food, they get through stomach acidity. And because Mother Nature designed them to find food and reproduce and come alive specifically in your gut, not the soil, but the gut, that's what they do. I think of them like I I like to think of them like little aliens in a spaceship. So they get down to your gut and they say, "Wow, we're home, guys." So they open up the shell, they come climbing out, they're immediately finding food, eating food, digesting it. And these 4 strains have been studied by researchers. The first spore bacillus strain was identified in 1876. So there's nothing new about these kinds of strains. It's just simply, they've identified something well over 200 species of spore bacillus, but there's a very limited subset of these kind that are only friendly in the gut. So the 4 strains in Just Thrive were very carefully chosen because they come alive only there and they have very specific behaviors and produce benefits for us. So they get out, and the way they produce benefit is when they find food and digest it, they produce beneficial byproducts. And for 3 of those strains, they are making 2 different kinds of compounds. And I think of them like gunslingers. They've got a bag on either side, and they're making one compound and it goes in the bad guy bag, and they're making another compound byproduct that goes in the other bag. And they look around your gut, because remember, this is not nutrients. These are live organisms. So they're looking around your gut and they say, "Whoa, there's a bad guy over there. We got to get it." So they just reach in their bad guy bag. They scooch over next to the pathogen, and bang, they hit it with the compound. And just like a gunslinger, they're dead. Boom, gone, right? So the bad buggies start to go down. Then they continue looking around your gut and they say, "Wow, there's a good guy." And that particular strain makes all kinds of short chain fatty acids, or it makes vitamin K2, or it makes B complex. I tell you, Jeffrey, I always thought, coming from working in this industry my whole life, that the most important thing I could do for my health was to eat very clean, nutrient dense food, and based on a good solid biological diet. And it wasn't until I started to work for this company and study with Kiran Krishnan that I began to understand that that's only half of what you need to do to maintain health. You also have to properly take care of all those bacteria, those 100 trillion permanent residents, because they produce a huge variety of compounds, nutrients, enzymes. I mean, the list is endless. And that means we have to have the right guys down there at the right levels in the right diversity so that we can then take that nutrient dense food and get the greatest benefit from it. So the part two of what they're doing is they're reaching in that bag and they're scooching over next to a beneficial strain and they're feeding it like fertilizer. So they become like a little microbial farmer. And so now your good guys are coming up, 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 up. So these kinds of strains chosen for this product, highly effective at coming down and just basically, like I say, I think of them like sheriffs traveling through this territory. And they're like, howdy, ma'am, can I help you today? Because they don't stay in one place. Unlike all of your permanent residents, they just pass through, cleaning things up, bring the bad guys go down, the good guys are coming up. But they get excreted out after about 3 weeks. So that's why, you definitely, for peak benefit, you really need to take them every single day because you get the greatest benefit by constantly having like troop after troop, an army just going through on a daily basis, making sure there's no gaps.
You hit on some really good points here. I know that it's funny because I get common questions every day, and you just talked about one of them. Can I take my Just Thrive every single day? Of course, because there are things that are built and there's also loss. We do lose things along the way. And the other question comes in, and this is an interesting question because it does make sense and it kind of shows maybe our mentality to things. Do I wait until I have stomach problems or yeast problems or yeast overgrowth to start taking a probiotic? Or can I use it ahead of time to get ahead of the game? And those are very common questions.
Yes. And the easiest way to think of Just Thrive spore-based probiotic is it was designed to imitate the natural cycle. So the amount of bacteria that is in just one capsule, that's kind of the minimum amount necessary that we have to get on a daily basis to just maintain health. And of course, we already know that most of us come from a place biologically of probably having to do some therapeutic catch up. So, yes, you absolutely want to do at least one capsule every day. Personally, I choose to do more because I want extra protection. Because the other thing that most people don't realize is that most of our immune system is embedded in our intestinal wall. So, with all of that, those immune receptor sites there, if you get an overgrowth of pathogens, which we know is likely to be most people, they're cranking out high levels of these irritants. That's the nature of a pathogen. Mostly what most of us have in our gut on an ongoing basis are pathogens that are just sort of low level 24/7, constantly producing irritants down there. The really lethal strains, luckily still at this point, are still relatively rare. So likely the gut wall becomes chronically irritated. It gets chronically irritated. That is going to directly impact the functioning of all those immune receptor sites located there. And bear in mind, it's like 75 to 80% of our immune system. So it has a major impact, the health of your gut, upon your ability to have an appropriate immune response. You want an immune system that is going to be able to say, there's a bad guy, we got to deal with it, so that gives you resistance to picking up things. But the flip side is you also don't want an immune system that's overreacting. You don't want it to not recognize a bad guy for so long that when it finally stumbles across an infection, now you get that, oh God, what was that phrase that we all learned during COVID? The when the immune system overreacts and sends all kinds of antibodies. And then when that happens, you actually experience damage and inflammation literally from your immune system. That's a lot what happens when we have allergies, when like we're reacting to something that should be benign like pollen. It's because your immune system isn't recognizing that really pollen should be okay, and instead it's treating it like an enemy. So yeah, you want an immune system that has proper control and will protect you when you need protection and not overreact.
I tried the Just Thrive. Keith had given me a sample bottle a couple years ago, and I took it home, and I've been taking probiotics for 40 years.
Yeah.
I started with the old Continental liquids way, way, way back, and I've kind of progressed through everything. I've bounced all over the place like I've done, many radio shows as I've done. I'm trying new things all the time. This was the first time that I took a probiotic, and by the second day, I noticed something different.
Yeah.
And it was a different in the way my stomach felt. I mean, it was a difference in my stool. It was a difference in how I felt, in the freshness of my breath. I noticed that after the first bottle, I went and bought some more, obviously, because my skin, and thank goodness, I have decent skin, but it changed. It got better. And I thought to myself, I'm not going to give this that much credit right now. I'm going to try it a little bit longer. So I stayed on a big bottle, and then I'm like, all right, I have to give credit where it's due. So I'm a fan. And I love this. And like I said, the dogs love it, but I've seen dramatic differences. Now, I do one of those crazy things, and this is just my weird how my head works. When something's working really well, I stop taking it for a while just to see if I really was doing something right. And it just kicks me in the rear end every time. And I'm like, why did you do that? So then I go right back on it again. But this is something I travel with. This is something that makes a difference for me.
It's so easy to travel too. You don't have to take care of it in any way, shape, or form. No refrigeration, nothing.
I never ever thought that I would ever use a probiotic that wasn't in the refrigerator. Because when I would travel, I'd pack it last. I'd get to the hotel. I'd put it in an ice bucket because there wasn't a lot of refrigerators in the rooms back then. And then when I packed to go home, I'd pack it last. I'd run home. I'd open my suitcase, get it in the refrigerator. And all of a sudden we get these shelf stable, beautiful products that we get to use. And boy, what a godsend, I'll tell you.
I'll tell you, if you really want to surprise guests that come over to eat, you can actually take the spore-based probiotic, open up the cap, dump the powder in food, and bake it. And they are so resistant to heat. They've been tested and survive temperatures over 350 degrees.
Oh my God, I did not know that. That is an interesting side note.
Yeah. And
that shows the stability.
Oh, when they're in that spore shell, if they have been manufactured correctly at the commercial level, I like to joke around that the only way that you can kill them is if you're out camping and you drop your bottle in the campfire. That's it.
I love it. They're like their own little bomb shelters. I love it. The other thing I think I want people to understand is that, the use of these on an ongoing basis, we prioritized our vitamins, that we want to use them every day because they do what they do, and they build and they help and they balance and they restructure and they lubricate and all that. But I want people to put the example of the Just Thrive probiotics into the same mental category and give them the same necessity that we need with our vitamins.
Yes, I can't underline that more strongly because, this product, as far as I know, is the only probiotic out there that has a peer-reviewed, published clinical study showing that the proprietary 4-strain formula was shown in a human clinical trial, gold standard, that one cap a day in one bottle showed a 42% sealing up of that gut wall. And the way that they measured that in that clinical study is, if you want to get a clinical diagnosis for leaky gut, I mean, we all know that it's likely that everybody has one, but if you want to be sure and get a clinical diagnosis, what you do is you give a blood sample, and the lab will look in your blood sample for the presence of a bacterially produced compound called lipopolysaccharide, which is shortened to LPS. if LPS is found in your blood sample, the only way it can get in there is you have holes in your gut, and it's being produced by the bacteria in the gut, but then leaking through holes into your bloodstream. So there was a 42% reduction in LPS in those participants. The other thing that was really shocking about that study is it was conducted mostly on very young college students, and they wanted to make sure that everybody who participated was absolutely squeaky clean with no any kind of chronic conditions underlying. So they literally had to fill out 12 different questionnaires to make sure they were truly healthy. Nevertheless, everybody gave an initial blood sample, then they were given half of them were given a probiotic that was, the sample that had nothing in it, and then the other half of the group got the real deal, Just Thrive. With that first blood sample, extremely healthy young people, 20s, teens, maybe something like 50% of them showed. Now, I'm not positive on that statistic. I'll have to get back to you, but it was very high percentage showed not just leaky gut, severe leaky gut. Severe leaky gut. So what happens with leaky gut is it's so invisible, people do not recognize it. And this is part of the reason why so very few people get diagnoses for it, because there's no external symptoms for a really long time. But the complications of having it for a really long time are quite metabolic and intense, because it means you are leaking toxins into your bloodstream, and your bloodstream is carrying those toxins to virtually any organ, any system in the entire body, including your brain. So that is we know quite clearly now that the gut-brain axis connects the brain to the gut because so much activity is controlled by those bacteria in the gut.
I'm going to ask you your opinion on something. There was a time when we were young in our careers, a while ago, and a lot of us were told and taught that if you're on an antibiotic, you should not take a probiotic at the same time, because they were very fragile and they were very weak and they were very low potency. How do you feel today about being an antibiotic? Do you recommend people use them all the way through because the antibiotic's not killing everything, or do you wait until they're done?
Yeah, such a great question. So before I jump into spore bacillus and antibiotics, let me clarify, because I get this question all the time too, and I'm sure you do, because most people are familiar with probiotics that are lactobacillus and bifidobacterium based. And I spent many years working on the vitamin oil, and I know personally that some people do feel better using that kind of probiotic. And we had the gastric survival test results conducted by an outside lab, not inside by Just Thrive, but an outside lab, showing that when we tested more than 30 all top selling, all exclusively lacto-bifido-based probiotics, all with good dates, more than 99% of those bacteria came up in those tests as dead. They don't survive alive. They don't colonize. But we know from personal experience that some people feel better using those. So how do they feel better if they're arriving dead? And the answer is actually kind of simple, which is that, when you're producing a commercial probiotic, and I don't care if it's spore-based or lacto-bifido-based, it's basically the same process. You have a big vat, you put a food source in the vat, you put your bacterial strain or strains, the bacteria eat the food, reproduce, and then the raw material supplier will harvest the bacteria. Well, with lactobacillus and bifidobacterium, because they don't have that ability to make that shell to protect themselves, the moment you harvest them from that vat, you've removed them from their food source, and they're now weakening and dying. So we all know that when you're making a commercial product, it's months, if not years before that customer can consume that capsule. So that's, the explanation behind why it is that those bacteria show up as dead. But when they're alive in the vat, eating the food, they are making micronutrients as natural byproducts, because that's what bacteria do. They always make byproducts as part of their process of being alive and fermenting. So those micronutrients get stored in the outer cellular wall for the Lactobacillus and bifidobacterium. So even though they arrive dead, hopefully some of those 100 trillion permanent residents are going to be able to get some access to some of those nutrients, and you can get some benefit. So I think of that whole process as sort of like if you have a garden, you're tossing manure in, because manure is nutrient dense, but it's not alive. So with spore bacillus, it's like a whole different animal. I almost wish they weren't both called probiotics, because when you have a properly manufactured spore-based probiotic, it's got the shell on. And so those kinds of bacteria can actually stay alive in the presence of the antibiotic. So abroad, physicians have been using spore bacillus along with antibiotics for decades. That's common practice abroad in Europe, Asia, Latin America. So I encourage people to if they have to go on an antibiotic, and antibiotics can be life-saving and critically important, you got to do it. Like I got dental work recently, had to do an antibiotic. It's just the nature of living in the modern industrial world. And what I did was I took one of the Just Thrive probiotic at the same time that I took my antibiotic. And I noticed I didn't get the same degree. Sometimes people really react to antibiotics. They get a lot of gastric distress and stuff. I didn't get that. But the really important time was once I finished the antibiotic, I was doing 3 and 4 caps every single day. Because I think of the bacteria in that product as being like super soldiers. And, when you take an antibiotic, it's like from your gut bacteria's perspective, you're tossing a poison bomb down into their home and they go, whoa, poison, run, right?
That's funny.
They're running away from the antibiotic and they're burying themselves as deeply as they can in your mucosal lining. And I like to call that the mucosal blanket, because what your body does is it makes this very thick mucosal layer that it lays on top of your gut wall, because bizarrely your gut wall is only 1 cell thick. So it needs a lot of protection. So you want a nice, thick, resilient mucosal blanket. So they bury themselves into that mucosal blanket, and to a degree, some bacteria will bury themselves deeply enough that they can always survive. That's why you can do an antibiotic, but it never kills 100% of all your bacteria. So the moment you stop taking the antibiotic, however, is when you're at greatest risk, because as soon as you stop dumping poison into that environment, the very first bacteria that emerge out of your mucosal blanket could be good guys or bad guys, right? If good guys are the first ones to reemerge, they will dominantly repopulate your gut, and you're going to feel okay after that round of antibiotics. But what if it's bad guys? And God forbid, what if it's the antibiotic resistant superbugs? Then you're in serious trouble. Those are the folks that, wind up with the really severe infections post antibiotic. Even the CDC says to this day, when you do a round of antibiotics, you are, I think it's seven times more likely to develop C. diff. So I didn't want that happening. I didn't want a little C. diff guy emerging out of my gut blanket.
No.
Yeah, right. So I make sure I have tons and tons of my Just Thrive super soldiers, because they're standing guard. And as your bacteria emerge out of that gut wall to repopulate, you want loads and loads of them saying, bad guy, kill it. Boom, gone. Oh, here comes a good guy. We need to feed it fertilizer. As far as I know, Just Thrive is the only probiotic that has a peer-reviewed published clinical study showing 1 cap a day in just 3 weeks it increases the beneficial population by 10 to 100 fold. That's an incredibly important statistic for anybody going on an antibiotic, because they have to rebuild their gut very fast and correctly, right? You want to rebuild it with the good guys. You don't want to be rebuilding bad guys.
Well, the thing is today, there's so many people eating unhealthy food. There's so many people using medications that have their place. And there's just so many people that today are living hugely stressful lives. We have pollution. We have major stress. We're not sleeping well. We eat too much sugar. I mean, if there's anything we could do wrong, we do it all. And we really do need to start
And we sterilize bacteria out of everything, out of the soil, out of our agricultural growing practices, and out of food processing.
Well, and I think that the thing is, I think people are starting to get it. And I have really enjoyed this because you're showing a lot of the behind the scenes, which I think is really important. And we all know that all products in every industry are not the same. Everything brings something to the table. Some just bring a lot more.
Yeah,
And I was kind of bowled over with this, and I went into it just thinking, another probiotic, and I love Keith. So, I said, yeah, I'm going to try it. So, I tried it. I was just like, gee, I can't believe that it's doing this. I said, I refuse to accept this right at the beginning, but, I have no reason but to think anything but good things about the line. And I thank you for taking the time to not only to express the ideas and the philosophies and behind the company and the line, but also doing it in a way that no matter who's listening, they're going to be like, okay, I get it. Thank you for that, because there's a skill in being able to teach in a way that you leave people with a message that they'll remember. So I thank you for that. Quick
Thank you.
thing.
Because when I started working for this company, I felt like I fell into a pot of gold. I've been in this industry my whole life, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is going to revolutionize the natural products industry. Oh, and I do want to say quickly about multis and things like that. Consider the fact that as the probiotic has been shown to reduce those LPS levels, which indicates that your gut wall is becoming more resilient and stronger, and that can help regrow the microvilli. It is critical to regrow the microvilli in order to be able to effectively absorb nutrient in any other supplement out there. And if we all have, as clinical outcomes indicate, a chronically irritated gut wall, people potentially have chronically blunted or next to no existing microvilli, which means it doesn't matter how much nutritional supplements you spend your money on, it's going to be literally being flushed down the toilet if you're not absorbing them properly. I really do believe that a really good probiotic is absolutely critical for everybody, first and foremost, for absorption reasons, if nothing else.
And I agree with that. I just look at it this way. I just consider, a quality probiotic as the initial stage of everything good that we have the possibility of getting into our system. This is kind of the little walking the blind, or the little old lady across the street. This is what it does. It supports us on every level. So I'll tell you what, leave everybody with a thought for the day. Joanie's thought for the day. It could be on anything, but I put everybody on the spot at the end of my podcast.
Well, all right. So I'm going to butcher it a little, but this is actually part of my personal signature, which is that only fools can accomplish the impossible, because they're the only ones who try.
Oh, I kind of like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Joanie Blaxter, what a pleasure to meet you. And I'm going to ask you a question. Would you like to come back and see us again?
Of course. There's so much more to talk about. You wouldn't believe how much more there is.
Well, and
floating.
And I'm looking forward to that. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in today. I hope you enjoyed this. I sure did. Make sure to go to my webpage, drjeffreyburke.com. When you get there, just tap on the Honest Health logo. It'll take you to Spotify. You can listen to your audio anywhere. You could also tap on the YouTube channel, and you can watch our gorgeous faces have a conversation, which is good as well, whether you want to watch or listen or both. I thank everyone for taking the time to tune in today. Hopefully, every little bit that you learn along the way from the best minds in the industry will allow you to make better, wiser, healthier, and more decisive decisions about your health and well-being. Everybody have a wonderful day. Be well, and God bless.
Stay tuned for more information from the Honest Health Podcast with Jeffrey Burke. And make sure to check back often for interviews and conversations from the guests we all want to hear from. I'm John the Announcer. Thanks for listening.